We don't want to bomb Iran. This is what the isolationists tell us. We don't want to bomb Iran. It'll start a war. We don't want to bomb Iran. Well, I can't wait to see the plan that's going to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. The president has my 100% support, and he's got you, the American people, who do not want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. You're not pacifists. You're not isolationists. You're red-blooded Americans.
Well, Politico is now reporting that a group of Republican Warhawks, including the pig that you just heard from, they're undertaking this effort to convince the Trump White House to attack Iran. Obviously, this is at the behest of Israel, which sees Iran as its top enemy. Which, if that is what they think, then they can go to war with Iran themselves, but of course they want to drag the United States into it. And Mark Levin, the individual you just heard from, is claiming that the report is false. He's saying it's false, and he's accusing the writer of being a scribe for the isolationists. Which sounds pretty good, by the way. But before we get into that, let's dive into the reporting itself. So Politico reports that according to an intelligence official, as well as another Trump ally familiar with the matter, during a private lunch with the president at the White House last Wednesday, conservative talk show host Mark Levin told Trump that Iran was, get a load of this is so hilarious, days away from building a nuclear weapon, an argument Trump's own intelligence team has told the president is not accurate. You want to know who else said that Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon is days away? Netanyahu in 2012 and then again in 2015. Go fight your own war, bitch. Waz, back to you.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to know like Mark Levin's background and history. Like this guy is your neocon's neocon. There's never been a war, particularly in the Middle East, that he didn't want the US to intervene on, a regime that wasn't, completely like sycophantic to the US foreign policy establishment that they didn't want to topple. Like it's never happened. Like there's never been a case where it's like, no, maybe we shouldn't do X, Y, and Z over in the Middle East. And so this guy ringing the alarm bells and saying, oh, quote unquote, Iran is about to make a nuclear weapon. Another thing that I would challenge, like, do Americans not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon? Seems like the only countries we ever leave alone are those that possess nuclear weapons. The only countries we don't go out of our way to go to war with and pick a fight with, like directly anyway, I'm not talking about stuff like Russia, etc., are those with nuclear weapons. Like, would it be the end of the world? I don't think so.
I mean, look, I think Israel fears Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon, not because they actually think Iran is going to use said nuclear weapon. It's a deterrent.
Yeah.
It's a deterrent. Why do you think that, in regard to US foreign policy in Ukraine, I think that there have been examples of the US being irresponsible in some cases, but also they have been cautious in some contexts because they know Russia is a nuclear country. They have nuclear weapons. And so Iran knows, because Israel's been so vocal about it for like decades at this point, that Israel wants the US to go to war with Iran on its behalf. If you have a nuclear weapon, the US might be less incentivized to do that. You get what I'm saying? So like, I understand the argument in favor of allowing Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. In fact, there's a whole political theory called nuclear peace theory, which sounds insane, but it is a theory.
If everybody had one, we'd be at peace.
That's the argument. I don't know if I fully buy that argument, but I do think that it could potentially serve as a deterrent in the context of Iran obtaining one. That being said, I'm not fully convinced that Iran should have one, but Israel's got nuclear weapons and no one's making a big deal about that. In fact, they still deny that they have nuclear weapons, which is hilarious. But nonetheless, according to Reuters, estimates of how long it would take for Iran to build a nuclear weapon do vary, not from a matter of days, but potentially between months and a year. Now, one of the goals of the Iran nuclear agreement that was signed and accomplished by the Obama administration in 2015 was to ensure that Iran was not, or Iran was basically limiting their nuclear program to ensure that they would not be able to like produce a weapon for some time, like up to a year, right? And indeed, Iran's enrichment of uranium plummeted while the deal was still intact. That was the deal that Netanyahu convinced Donald Trump to rip up in 2018, I believe it was. And so you'll see exactly what happened with this visual, right? So you see you see all of this nuclear activity up until 2015. At that point, they stop enriching uranium. And then once Trump pulls out of the Iran nuclear deal, they go back to enriching uranium because there's no nuclear deal anymore. And you need the enriched uranium in order to build the nuclear weapon. So do you think it was an accident that Netanyahu wanted the US to rip up the Iran nuclear deal? It wasn't an accident. He knew, like, he didn't want a deal. He didn't want diplomacy. He just wants us to go to war and carry out regime change again in Iran. It's gross. It's so gross. And one of his biggest supporters is Mark Levin, as you mentioned. He's a hardcore neocon. And so Levin is furious that there's now a faction within the conservative movement, the Republican Party, that is isolationist, and they don't want to go to war in the Middle East. They don't want to send our troops to Iran, and he's pissed about it. Okay, Tucker Carlson happens to be on the right side of this particular issue. He doesn't want the US to go to war with Iran. Levin has attacked him pretty viciously for that. In fact, Levin urged Trump to allow the Israeli government to strike Iranian nuclear sites, which Trump has told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu would torpedo the diplomacy. That's not the bug, that's the feature. I think Trump knows that. I don't know for sure though. Levin has also publicly been raging against Trump's special envoy. I've kind of shared this with you before. So Steve Witkoff is someone that Levin despises because Witkoff, at least rhetorically, and there have been some examples, wants to kind of try diplomacy first and see if that works out. But aside from Levin, MAGA loyalists have been warily eyeing Rupert Murdoch's papers, particularly the New York Post, as they've savaged Witkoff, suggesting at one point that he's a mouthpiece for Qatar. He's Jewish, by the way. Right. The allegations have infuriated some in Trump's inner circle, who see them as an effort to undercut the talks. And referring to the alleged lobbying campaign, an anonymous senior administration official told Politico, they're trying to push the president to make a decision. That's not what he wants. There's clearly a lobby for war with Iran versus those who are more aligned with the president. God, I hope so. That know he is the one that has been able to bring them to the negotiating table, meaning Iran. And Obama obviously brought them to the negotiating table too, but don't just forget about that. Encourage Trump to continue pursuing a diplomatic deal with Iran, because we shouldn't go to war with Iran. That would be a disaster. For reasons that I've described on the show before. We can get into it again, but I want to give you a chance to weigh in, Waz.
Just a couple of things I find to be interesting. One is the idea that you would smear a guy as an agent of the Qataris. The implication being like, oh, it's a foreign nation state that's wielding influence to shape US policy abroad.
That's very naughty.
While doing what they do on behalf of Israel. It's just like, it's hilarious. It's insane. Like, these people, they have such nerve. It's kind of crazy. Like the idea, well, you're influenced, he might be influenced by foreign cash, and that's terrible. And it's just like, that's just hilarious to me.
There's gambling in this establishment.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing I find to be pretty interesting is that Donald Trump's ascent in the Republican Party does break up a few of the hegemonic sort of religious ideas that have been in the GOP forever, which is one, free trade, where you see with the tariffs, where he's just like straight up, I hate free trade, I hate NAFTA, we want to tariff people into oblivion, blah, 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 blah. And just the idea that like his foreign policy team isn't completely staffed by neocons. This would have been unimaginable in the George W. Bush years, in a John McCain presidency, a Mitt Romney presidency. Would have been utterly unimaginable that anybody but neocons would have been influential in that foreign policy wing of the administration. So look, the neocons might end up winning out.
I hope not.
In the end, like we hope not. But just the idea that there is some kind of faction that is working against the neocon ideology is quite interesting, honestly.
Yeah, and you're right about the Bush years. There were no Republicans who were not hawkish at that time.
No
so this emergence of I don't even like calling them isolationists. I don't think they're necessarily isolationists. I think that they're actually seeing what's happening in the Middle East clearly because of our foibles in the past. You know what I'm saying? So one of those people, by the way, is Tucker Carlson. And I never thought in a million years that I would say that Tucker Carlson is giving me some hope on a situation. But in this particular case, he is, because he's got the ear of the president, believe it or not. They talk. And while Levin is lobbying for war, Tucker Carlson is trying to influence Trump to go in the diplomatic direction. And that's a good thing. So hours after Levin's meeting with Trump, Tucker Carlson weighed in and he accused him of trying to bully the US into war, writing on X, there is zero credible intelligence that suggests Iran is anywhere near building a bomb or has plans to, none. So why is Mark Levin once again hyperventilating about weapons of mass destruction, which is what manufactured consent to invade Iraq, of course, to distract you from the real goal, which is regime change. Young Americans heading back to the Middle East to topple yet another government. Where's the lie? Where's the lie? That's totally true. That is totally true. And look, people like to air their suspicions about Tucker Carlson and what his real motivations are. I don't care. As long as this is the message that's being pushed out to the right, to conservatives, and they're aware of it, they're aware of the accusation, that gives me a little bit of hope that Trump might even get some pressure from, a huge portion of his own base who do not want to go to war with Iran. What do you think, Waz?
Yeah, just a couple of things on that. Obviously, Tucker Carlson, not exactly a left-wing hero by any stretch. But even the sun shines on a dog's ass, as they say, right? And he happens to be right about the foreign policy element here. And, just for our audience to think about it slightly different from where Tucker Carlson is taking it. Yes, it would be a disaster on our resources as a country in terms of how much it would cost. The human capital and the human cost would be astronomical. Make no mistake, like they failed in Iraq. They even failed in Afghanistan against the freaking Taliban, who took over like a day after we left. We were there for 20 years. They took over a day after we left. Iran is another beast on another universe from those countries and those regimes. So much stronger, okay? So much more entrenched. So much bigger armies. Like it's just a whole other whatever. And let's just say
hold on. I gotta weigh in on that just to bolster what you're saying, because you're absolutely right. Guys, Iran arms the Houthis in Yemen. How long were we involved in Yemen trying to beat the Houthis? Did we win? Did we win? I'm just saying, like,
those are a bunch of dudes in caves, guys. And we couldn't do anything with them. Our $1 trillion military budget couldn't do anything with these dudes in caves. So, and let's just say again, it's not gonna be a cakewalk. It's gonna be a disaster. There's no way for this to not end in disaster. Now you destabilize that country, and all you have is death, despair, hunger, chaos, utter chaos in a place. That's if we achieve our goal, guys.
The American dream.
Like, that's if we achieve our goal. And Iran, just so we're clear here, because Netanyahu keeps saying we should give them the Libya plan. Like, he keeps calling it the Libya plan, which is, Gaddafi, the former ruler of Libya, he agreed with the US to like leave his nuclear program alone. And he was friends with the US at the time, so he could put some faith and trust in that. Fast forward a couple of decades, US turned against them. Rebels raid the capital. They capture this dude and sodomize this guy in broad daylight on the street.
Well, things are better in Libya, aren't they?
Oh my god, like it's never been worse. And so you think those people in Iran, when they're trying to be convinced to let go of their nuclear program and do it like Gaddafi did, like they have TVs, guys. They know what happened there. They're not idiots. And so, yeah, that's why I think you're seeing the desperation. I think the neocons are understanding that Trump can see the obvious wisdom in pursuing a deal with Iran, even though Barry did it 10 years ago already, whatever. Pursuing a deal with these folks rather than, going the war method.
Now, Rupert Murdoch is also a neocon, wants to drum up support for a war in Iran. And so is Trump listening to Rupert Murdoch and Mark Levin? Politico also writes, or they share a perspective from a Trump confidant who says that Levin and Murdoch are all over Trump all the time. I actually think they hurt their case because I know Trump. Once he's kind of made up his mind or made his mind up, you can come at it later from a different angle, but you keep pressing, he digs in. But on the other hand, twice this week, 2 times this week, Trump appeared kind of skeptical that a deal with Iran was even possible. Let's watch.
And what's the main impediment to getting a deal?
Well, they're just asking for things that you can't do. They don't want to give up what they have to give up. You know what that is. They seek enrichment. We can't have enrichment. We want just the opposite. And so far, they're not there. I hate to say that because the alternative is a very, very dire one, but they're not there. They have given us their thoughts on the deal, and I said, it's just not acceptable.
Do you think you're going to be able to stop Iran from enriching its?
I don't know. I did think so, and I'm getting more and more less confident about it. They seem to be delaying, and I think that's a shame. But I'm less confident now than I would have been a couple of months ago. If they don't make a deal, they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. It would be nicer to do it without warfare, without people dying. Yeah. It's so much nicer to do it.
Or maybe we can just, not go to war with Iran. Is that even a consideration? Is that even a consideration? There are 3 options. Option 1, the best option, is to get Iran to sign a new nuclear deal, which I wish Trump had never ripped up to begin with, but okay. The second best option is if we fail to get a diplomatic, deal with Iran, then we just stand back. Iran, I don't see Iran as a threat to us. I don't. Just because Israel says Iran is a threat to us, and just because you have some people chanting death to America doesn't mean Iran, in this current war, okay, that's going on in the Middle East, which country has actually shown the most restraint? I'm serious. Israel has gone into Iran and assassinated a bunch of people. And you know what Iran does in retaliation? They let them know 72 hours in advance. Here is where we're going to do missile strikes in a remote part where no one is going to get hurt and nothing will be damaged. 72 hours, get ready. So Jordan can get ready to defend Israel, so they can have their missile defense system ready. Like, Iran is the country which in this current context has shown way more restraint than Israel has. Like, it's just amazing to me that we're like really considering starting another war with another Middle Eastern country with the intention to engage in regime change after all the failures that we've had in the Middle East in my lifetime. It's insane. Tucker Carlson is right on this issue. Like, obviously don't belabor it with Trump because apparently he digs his heels in. But Iran should be able to enrich enough uranium for energy.
Yeah,
which
domestic.
Is what they,
Domestic nuclear uses, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And another thing too that we do have to realize about the Trump rhetoric in public, like there's reports out there that behind the scenes that they're telling the Iranians, like, no, like doing your domestic nuclear program is not a problem. But in public, he's always going to give the most maximalist of demands in public and pretend like he's acting. It's just what he thinks negotiating is to be as ridiculous in your demands publicly as possible in your initial ask. But yeah, there are reports that like behind the scenes, they're telling the Iranians that the domestic uses for nuclear are completely fine. And again, we'd just be doing this just to do a favor for Israel, like straight up. That this is a power in the region that Israel can't just push around. They know they can't send the IDF in there to invade and start a war. That would be disastrous. They'd get their butts handed to them. And so it's like, yeah, let me go get my big brother on the kids on the block who I don't like. Then that's all that you're seeing here, folks.
Yep. I'm gonna leave you with one final thing. I know that this story has gone too long, but it's an important one. Mark Levin is a liar. So when he says that Iran is just days away from having a nuclear weapon, you shouldn't believe him because he has a history of lying. In fact, get a load of this lie, given what we just learned from Politico's reporting. Final video.
So I called the President of the United States earlier this morning, which I don't often do. He and I are very close friends. I know this upsets the isolationists and the fifth columnists and their media mouthpieces and propagandists. I said, Mr. President, have I lobbied you about Iran? He said, no. I said, Mr. President, when we met last week, did I lobby you about Iran? He said, no. The president knows exactly where I stand on Iran. And he told me he knows exactly where I stand on Iran because he watches my shows on Fox on Saturday and Sunday. The whole world knows where I stand on Iran. What I am not doing and what I would not do to Donald Trump is lead a lobbying campaign of hawks, as it was put in Politico, Warhawks.
No one should take this man seriously. He is a proven liar. He's not even fun to look at. Like, what's left? Like, what's the point? Watch something else, anything else. What a waste of your time.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.